Welcome to Sleepless History. I'm your host, and tonight we're travelling back to the 1800s to walk alongside the wagon trains that carved their way across the American continent. This is the story of the Oregon Trail, a story of repetition, of dust, of wheels, turning day after day across an endless landscape. Before we begin our journey, find a comfortable position, settle in. We'll be travelling slowly tonight, at the pace of oxen pulling a wagon, 2 miles per hour, sometimes less. There's no hurry on the trail. There never was. Part 1. The beginning of the trail. The Oregon Trail wasn't built. It was worn into existence. Between 1843 and 1869, more than 400,000 people travelled westward along this route. They moved in waves year after year, their wagon wheels pressing the same path deeper into the earth. The trail stretched approximately 2,000 miles from Independence, Missouri to Oregon City in the Oregon Territory. 2,000 miles. Let that distance settle in your mind. 2,000 miles at 2 miles per hour, on foot, beside a wagon. Most emigrants took between 4 and 6 months to complete the journey. 4 to 6 months of walking, of watching the same landscape roll by, day after day. Morning after morning, they would wake, cook breakfast, pack the wagon, and begin walking. Evening after evening, they would stop, unpack, cook dinner, and sleep. Then wake and do it all again. Let's start where they started. Independence, Missouri. In the early 1840s, Independence was the jumping off point. The last town, the last place to buy supplies, to reconsider, to turn back before committing to the vast emptiness ahead. Emigrants would arrive in Independence in the spring, usually April or May. They couldn't leave too early because the prairie grass wouldn't be high enough to feed their livestock. They couldn't leave too late because they needed to cross the mountains before the first snow. This narrow window meant that wagon trains clustered together, forming at the edge of civilization like water pooling before a spillway. Part 2. Preparation and departure. A family preparing for the Oregon Trail needed a wagon. Not just any wagon, but a specific type. The Prairie Schooner, as it became known. These weren't the large Conestoga wagons you might picture. Those were too heavy. A Prairie Schooner was smaller, lighter, usually about 10 feet long and 4 feet wide. The bed sat about 2 to 3 feet off the ground. The wagon bed was made of hardwood, usually oak or maple. The wheels were also wood, reinforced with iron tires. The whole thing was covered with canvas, stretched over wooden hoops. This canvas cover gave the wagon its name. From a distance, crossing the prairie, these white covers looked like sails on the ocean, prairie schooners. These wagons cost about $60 to $85 in the 1840s. $60 to $85. For context, that was roughly 3 months' wages for a labourer, a significant investment. But the wagon was only the beginning. Families needed to fill it with supplies for 6 months. 6 months of food, clothes, tools, and anything else they might need. The recommended load was about 2,000 to 2,500 pounds of supplies per family. Let me list what they carried. Listen to the rhythm of the provisions. 200 pounds of flour per person, 75 pounds of bacon per person, 20 pounds of sugar, 10 pounds of salt, 5 pounds of coffee, beans, dried fruit, rice, tea. Then the tools: axe, hammer, saw, nails, rope, extra wagon parts, spare wheels, axle grease, clothing, bedding, perhaps a few precious items from home, a Bible, a fiddle, dishes, all of this carefully arranged in the wagon bed, weight distributed, everything tied down. And then the livestock. Most wagons were pulled by oxen, usually 4 to 6 oxen per wagon. Oxen were preferred over horses because they were stronger, cheaper, and more reliable. They could eat prairie grass. They were less likely to be stolen by Native Americans. They cost about $25 to $40 per yoke. A yoke is a pair. Some families brought a milk cow tied to the back of the wagon. Some brought extra oxen. A few brought horses. All of these animals needed to be fed, watered, and cared for every single day of the journey. Add it all up. Wagon, supplies, livestock. A family might spend $600 to $1,500 outfitting for the trip. This was a fortune in the 1840s. The people making this journey were risking everything. Part 3. The first days on the trail. Imagine the first morning. You've said goodbye to independence. Your wagon is loaded. Your family is ready. The other wagons in your train stretch out ahead and behind you. Maybe 20 wagons. Maybe 40. Larger trains could have 100 or more wagons, though these usually split into smaller groups once on the trail. The wagon train elects a captain. Someone to make decisions, settle disputes, determine when to stop and start each day. Then you begin. Walking. The first few days are difficult, not because of danger or hardship, but because of adjustment. You're not used to walking all day. Your feet hurt. Your legs ache. The oxen are still learning their job. Everything feels new and uncertain. But you walk, one foot in front of the other, beside the wagon. The oxen plod ahead, slow and steady. The wagon creaks and sways. The wheels turn, around and around, crushing the grass beneath them. You walk for 4 hours, then stop, rest the animals, eat a quick meal, then walk again. 4 more hours, then stop for the night. This becomes the rhythm. Walk, stop, walk, stop. Set up camp, take down camp, walk, stop, walk, stop. The landscape in Missouri and eastern Kansas is rolling prairie, grass, hills, occasional trees along streams. It's not flat, not yet, but it's open, vast. The sky seems larger here than it did back home. Each evening the wagons form a circle, not for protection as you might have heard. Indian attacks were rare, especially in the early years. The circle was practical. It created a corral for the livestock. It organized the camp. Each family's wagon became their home, their territory. They would unhitch the oxen, let them graze inside the circle or just outside it, under watch. Then the work of making camp. Gather firewood, if any can be found. Sometimes there were trees along a river. Sometimes there was nothing but grass, and they would burn buffalo chips, dried buffalo dung. It burned slowly, gave off decent heat, and was available in quantities almost beyond counting. Someone would start the fire, someone else would fetch water, someone would begin preparing the evening meal, usually the same thing as every other evening meal: bacon, beans, cornbread or biscuits if there was time. Coffee, always coffee. The meal would be eaten, the dishes would be cleaned, then the family would prepare for sleep. Some slept in the wagon if there was room among the supplies. Most slept on the ground beneath the wagon or nearby. They would spread out bedrolls, canvas on the ground, blankets on top, lie down under the vast sky. and in the morning they would wake and do it all again. Part 4. The routine deepens. After a week, the routine is established. After 2 weeks, it feels like you've been doing this forever. After a month, you can barely remember life before the trail. Wake at first light. The camp stirs gradually. Someone stokes the fire back to life. Someone else begins preparing breakfast, usually the same as every breakfast. More bacon, more beans, more coffee, maybe some cornmeal mush. While breakfast cooks, the men round up the livestock. The oxen have been grazing, watched by rotating guards through the night. Now they must be gathered, inspected, and hitched to the wagons. This takes time. Oxen are not quick to cooperate. They must be yoked in pairs, then each pair must be chained to the wagon tongue. 4 oxen, 6 oxen. Yoke and chain. Check the harness. Check the wheels. Check the wagon tongue. Women and children pack the wagon. Everything that was taken out for the night must be loaded back in. Bedding, cooking gear, food, all of it carefully arranged again. Nothing can shift while the wagon is moving, or it will throw off the balance. By the time the sun is fully up, the train is ready to move. The captain gives the signal. The lead wagon begins, then the next, then the next. Your wagon falls into line. The oxen lean into the yoke. The wheels begin to turn. Another day of walking begins. The landscape scrolls by. Grass, sky, grass, sky. An occasional tree, a distant rise, grass, sky. You walk beside the wagon, not in it. The wagon is too full of supplies for passengers, and besides, the ride is rough. Every rock, every dip in the ground transmits directly through the wooden wheels to the wagon bed. Everything inside shakes and rattles constantly. It's easier to walk. So you walk and walk and walk. The sun climbs higher. The air grows warm, then hot. Dust rises from the trail, kicked up by hundreds of hooves and dozens of wheels. The dust coats everything. Your clothes, your face, your hair. You breathe it in. You taste it. By midday, everyone is grey with it. Around noon, the train stops. The oxen need rest. They can't work all day without water and grazing time. So the wagons pull off the trail near water if possible, or simply stop in place if there is no water. The oxen are unhitched, but not unyoked. They're allowed to graze, still in their yokes, so they can't wander far. People eat a quick meal. More bacon, some dried fruit, hardtack if the bread has run out, water from canteens. Then rest, maybe an hour, maybe 2, sitting in the shade of the wagon if there is any shade. More often just sitting on the prairie, on the grass, in the sun, waiting. Then the captain signals again. Time to move. Hitch the oxen, load up, fall into line, start walking. The afternoon is longer than the morning. The heat is worse. The dust is worse. Your feet hurt more, but you walk, one foot in front of the other. The wagon creaks. The wheels turn. The oxen plod forward. Finally evening. The sun drops toward the horizon. The captain looks for a good camping spot. Near water is best. A stream, a river, a spring. But water isn't always available. Sometimes you camp dry and ration what water remains in the barrels. The wagons form their circle. The oxen are unhitched. The evening routine begins again. Fire, food, clean up, sleep. Day after day after day. The same routine, the same rhythm. Wake, pack, walk, stop, walk, stop, camp, sleep, wake, pack, walk, stop, walk, Stop, Camp, Sleep, Part 5, Crossing Kansas Territory. The trail west from Independence crosses into what was then Kansas Territory. This is prairie, true prairie. The grass grows tall here, sometimes higher than a man's head in the wet areas near streams. But mostly it's short grass, endless short grass prairie. The wagon trains follow the Kansas River for a while, then turn northwest toward the Platte River. This section of the trail, the first several hundred miles, is almost featureless. Gentle rises, shallow valleys, no mountains, no dramatic landmarks, just grass and sky. The monotony is profound. Each day looks like the last. The landscape changes so slowly that you don't notice it changing at all. You walk through an ocean of grass, and like an ocean, it seems to have no beginning and no end. People on the wagon trains kept diaries. Many of these diaries survive. When you read them, you see the monotony reflected in the entries. The first week, people write long, detailed entries about everything they see. By the second week, the entries are shorter. By the third week, many entries simply say, "Travelled 15 miles today. Good weather." By the fourth week, some people stop writing entirely because there's nothing new to say. But let me tell you what they did write about. The things that broke the monotony. They wrote about landmarks. When you reach a landmark, it proves you're making progress. The first major landmark was Alcove Spring, about 100 miles from Independence. A beautiful spring of clear water surrounded by trees. Wagon trains would stop here for a day sometimes, resting the animals, doing laundry in the spring, enjoying the shade. The next landmark was the crossing of the Big Blue River. This was a significant river crossing. If the water was low, wagons could ford it, driving the oxen right through the water with the wagon following. If the water was high, they had to ferry the wagons across on rafts or wait for the water to go down. Either way, it was an event, something different, something to mark in the diary. Then there was Fort Kearny, about 300 miles from Independence, in what is now Nebraska. Fort Kearny was a U.S. Army fort established in 1848 to protect the trail. By the time you reached Fort Kearny, you had been travelling for about 3 weeks. 3 weeks of walking. 3 weeks of the same routine. The fort was civilization, a place to buy supplies if needed, to mail letters back home, to talk to someone other than your own wagon train. People would rest at Fort Kearny for a day or two, then move on. Part 6. The Platte River Valley. After Fort Kearny, the trail follows the Platte River. For the next 300 miles, you walk beside the Platte. This is the most monotonous section of the entire trail. The Platte River is wide and shallow, too thick to drink, too thin to plough, people said. The water is muddy, full of silt, but it's water, and that's what matters. The valley is flat, perfectly flat. The river flows slowly through it. The grass grows. The sky stretches overhead, and you walk. Day after day after day, walking beside the Platte. The river is on your left if you're on the south side of the river, which most wagon trains were. The prairie extends to your right, grass, sky, heat, dust. The wagons move in a line. Your wagon, the wagon ahead of you, the wagon behind you. All day long you walk in the dust cloud created by the wagons and animals ahead. It's better to be near the front of the train, but someone has to be at the back. The position rotates. Some days you eat dust all day. Some days you have clearer air. The Platte River Valley is where the journey truly becomes repetitive. There are no major landmarks for long stretches, no hills to climb, no rivers to cross, just the river beside you and the trail ahead of you, and the same thing day after day. This is where I want you to really feel the rhythm, the wheels turning, around and around, the creak of the wagon, the plodding steps of the oxen, your own footsteps, left foot, right foot, right foot, hour after hour after hour. The sun rises behind you, climbs overhead, sets ahead of you. Each sunset is spectacular on the prairie. The sky turns orange, then red, then purple. The grass glows in the slanted light. But you've seen this sunset before, yesterday, the day before that. Even beauty becomes routine. At night, the sky fills with stars, more stars than you've ever seen. The Milky Way is a bright band across the heavens. You lie on your bedroll and look up at infinity, but you're tired, so tired, and you have to do this all again tomorrow. So you sleep, wake, pack, walk, stop, walk, stop, camp, sleep, wake, pack, walk, stop, walk, stop, camp, sleep. The wagon wheels turn, around and around and around. Part 7. Life on the trail. Let me tell you more about the daily life, the small details that made up the experience. Water was a constant concern. The Platte was always there, but its water was poor, muddy, and full of sediment. People would fill buckets and let the sediment settle overnight, then carefully pour off the clearer water from the top. Or they would strain it through cloth, but even then, the water was never truly clear. Better water came from springs and small streams that fed into the Platte. When the train passed one of these, people would rush to fill every container they had. Water barrels on the wagons, canteens, pots. Fresh, clear water was precious. Fuel for fires was increasingly scarce as you moved west. Trees disappeared from the landscape. By the time you were well into the Platte River Valley, there was no wood at all except what you carried with you. So people burned buffalo kips, dried buffalo dung. At first, this disgusted the emigrants, especially the women. The idea of cooking food over burning dung seemed appalling, but necessity overcame disgust quickly. Buffalo chips were everywhere, literally everywhere. The buffalo herds that roamed the plains were vast beyond comprehension. Millions of animals. They left behind a virtually unlimited supply of fuel. Children would gather the chips, collecting them in bags or carrying them in their aprons. The chips burned clean once dried, with little smoke and no unpleasant smell. By the second week on the trail, no one thought twice about it. Food on the trail was monotonous. Bacon and beans, beans and bacon, cornbread or biscuits, coffee, sometimes dried fruit, sometimes rice. On good days, someone might shoot game, antelope, rabbit, prairie chicken. Later, when the buffalo herds were encountered, there was buffalo meat, but mostly it was bacon and beans. The cooking was done over an open fire in a cast iron pot, the same pot meal after meal. The bacon grease was saved and used for cooking other things. Nothing was wasted. Bread was made when time permitted, mixing flour, salt, and water into dough, then baking it in a Dutch oven set in the coals. But this took time, and time was often short. Many families ran out of flour and relied on cornmeal instead, making cornbread or mush. Coffee was essential. Hot coffee in the morning, hot coffee in the evening. The coffee was boiled in a pot directly on the fire, grounds and all, strong and bitter. But it was hot and caffeinated, and it was routine. Every meal started or ended with coffee. Laundry was done when there was time and good water. This wasn't often. Clothes became dirty and stayed dirty. People wore the same clothes day after day. Women wore long dresses that dragged in the dust. Men wore sturdy pants and shirts. Everyone wore hats. You had to wear a hat on the prairie or the sun would burn you terribly. Shoes wore out. The constant walking destroyed them. People who started the journey with good leather shoes often finished in shoes that were more patched than original material. Some people's shoes wore out completely, and they walked the last part of the trail in moccasins purchased from Native Americans, or even barefoot. Part 8. The buffalo. Somewhere in western Kansas or eastern Nebraska, the wagon trains entered buffalo country. The great herds of American bison still roamed the plains in the 1840s and 50s, though their numbers were already declining from hunting. The first sight of buffalo was remarkable. The herds were vast, thousands of animals, sometimes tens of thousands. They covered the prairie like a brown carpet, stretching to the horizon. When a herd was near the trail, the wagon train would stop. Men would grab their rifles and go hunting. Buffalo meat was excellent, and a single buffalo provided hundreds of pounds of it. The meat could be eaten fresh or dried into jerky for later use. Hunting buffalo was dangerous. The animals were huge, weighing up to 2,000 pounds. A wounded buffalo was unpredictable and could charge. Men were injured, occasionally killed, in buffalo hunting accidents. But successful hunts meant fresh meat. The wagon train would stop for a day while the women cut the meat into strips and hung it on lines to dry in the sun. Children would tend the fires for smoking the meat. The smell of cooking buffalo would fill the camp. Then, meat preserved, the train would move on. The buffalo themselves were not particularly afraid of the wagon trains. Sometimes a herd would cross the trail right in front of the wagons. When this happened, there was nothing to do but stop and wait. The buffalo would flow around and between the wagons like a river. This could take hours. The animals moved slowly, unhurried. The wagon train simply had to wait. At night, if a herd was nearby, you could hear them. The sound of thousands of buffalo moving, grazing, breathing, a low rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. Some people found it comforting, some found it unsettling, but it was part of the soundscape of the plains. Part 9. The Native Americans. All along the trail, wagon trains encountered Native Americans. The plains were home to many tribes: the Kansa, the Pawnee, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Lakota Sioux. Relations between the emigrants and the Native Americans were complex. Contrary to popular mythology, Indian attacks on wagon trains were rare, especially before the late 1850s. The tribes of the plains were more interested in trade than warfare during the early years of the trail. Native Americans would approach the wagon trains to trade. They offered fresh meat, fish, buffalo robes, moccasins, horses. In exchange, they wanted manufactured goods: knives, blankets, beads, tobacco, cloth, metal tools. These trading encounters were generally peaceful, though emigrants often recorded feeling nervous about them. The cultural gap was vast. language barriers made communication difficult. Misunderstandings happened, but violence was uncommon. What was more common was theft. Horses and oxen would occasionally disappear from the herd at night. Whether these were stolen or simply strayed was often unclear. Emigrants blamed Indians. Indians pointed out that the wagon trains were crossing their land, disrupting the buffalo herds and bringing disease. Disease was a terrible consequence of the trail. Emigrants brought cholera, smallpox, measles, and other diseases with them. These diseases devastated Native American populations who had no immunity. Entire villages were wiped out. This growing catastrophe would eventually lead to increased hostilities, but in the early years of the trail, most encounters were non-violent. The wagon trains would pass Native American camps, typists arranged in circles, horses grazing nearby, people watching the wagon train pass, children running alongside for a while, dogs barking. Then the camp would fall behind. The wagon train would move on, walking, always walking. Part 10. Landmarks of the Central Trail. As the wagon trains continued west along the Platte, certain landmarks broke the monotony. These landmarks were recorded in nearly every diary, sketched in journals, mentioned in letters home. They were proof of progress. The first major landmark after Fort Kearny was Courthouse Rock. About 200 miles west of the fort, Courthouse Rock rises from the prairie like a building. The formation is made of clay and sandstone, eroded into a shape that early travelers thought resembled a courthouse. It's visible from the trail for miles as you approach. Seeing Courthouse Rock was significant. It meant you had covered about 500 miles from Independence, about a quarter of the journey. People would estimate their arrival date in Oregon based on reaching Courthouse Rock on schedule. The wagon train would pass Courthouse Rock slowly. The formation would appear on the horizon days before you reached it. Each day it would grow slightly larger. Then you would be beside it, then past it. Then it would recede behind you, slowly shrinking day by day until it disappeared. 20 miles past Courthouse Rock was Chimney Rock. This is perhaps the most famous landmark on the Oregon Trail. Chimney Rock is a natural pillar of rock rising over 300 feet from its base. It looks like a chimney or a needle pointing at the sky. Like Courthouse Rock, Chimney Rock was visible for days before and after passing it. It was a waypoint. Everyone who traveled the Oregon Trail saw Chimney Rock and wrote about it. The formation was taller in the 1840s than it is now. Lightning strikes and erosion have worn it down over the years. Passing Chimney Rock was another milestone. You were making progress. The miles were adding up behind you. Next came Scott's Bluff, a massive formation of cliffs and bluffs rising 800 feet above the river valley. The trail passed through a gap in the bluffs called Mitchell Pass. The walls of the pass rose on either side of the wagons, a dramatic change from the flat prairie. After Scott's Bluff came Fort Laramie, about 650 miles from Independence. Fort Laramie was a major stopping point. Originally a fur trading post, it had become a military fort and an important resupply point for the wagon trains. By the time you reached Fort Laramie, you had been on the trail for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks of walking, 6 weeks of dust and heat, and the same routine day after day. Fort Laramie was civilization again, a place to rest, to repair wagons, to buy supplies if you had the money, to mail letters home. The emigrants would pay inflated prices for goods at Fort Laramie. Flour that cost a few dollars in Independence might cost $20 at Fort Laramie. But if you needed it, you paid. Most wagon trains rested at Fort Laramie for 2 or 3 days, then moved on. Part 11. Into the mountains. West of Fort Laramie, the character of the trail began to change. The flat prairie gradually gave way to more varied terrain, rolling hills, rocky outcrops. The elevation increased, though so gradually you barely noticed. The trail continued to follow the North Platte River, then turned southwest to follow the Sweetwater River. This section was harder, the ground was rougher. The rivers had to be crossed and recrossed multiple times. Wagons broke down more frequently. The wheels would crack, the axles would break, the wagon tongues would snap. Each breakdown meant stopping to make repairs. Every wagon train included men who were reasonably skilled at woodworking and blacksmithing. They would work together to fix the broken wagons using spare parts and materials scavenged from abandoned wagons along the trail. Yes, abandoned wagons. By this point in the journey, the trail was littered with the debris of earlier wagon trains, broken wagon wheels, furniture thrown out to lighten the load, trunks of clothing, barrels, tools. Even the carcasses of dead oxen and horses lined the trail. The emigrants had started the journey trying to bring everything they owned, but the reality of the weight became clear. The more the wagon weighed, the harder the oxen had to work. Overworked oxen broke down, became lame, died, so people started throwing things out. Family heirlooms, heavy furniture, books, anything non-essential had to go. The trail through the Sweetwater River Valley was marked by more significant landmarks. Independence Rock was one of the most famous. A massive granite outcrop, about 130 feet tall and nearly 2,000 feet long. The rock sits alone on the plain beside the Sweetwater River. Independence Rock got its name because wagon trains aimed to reach it by July 4th, Independence Day. This timing meant you were on schedule. If you reached Independence Rock by early July, you would probably make it over the mountains before the snow. Emigrants would climb Independence Rock and carve their names into it. Thousands upon thousands of names were carved into the granite over the years. Many are still visible today. Carving your name was a way of leaving a mark, proof that you had come this far. Past Independence Rock, the trail became more difficult. The landscape was increasingly rocky and steep. The wagon wheels struggled over the rough ground. The oxen strained in their yokes. Then came the real mountains, the Rocky Mountains. The trail crossed the Continental Divide at South Pass, a broad, gradual pass through the mountains at an elevation of about 7,600 feet. South Pass was remarkable precisely because it wasn't remarkable. It was so gradual that many emigrants didn't realize they had crossed the Continental Divide until someone told them. But the air was thinner at this altitude. People and animals tired more easily. The nights were cold, even in summer. And from South Pass onward, any rivers you crossed flowed west toward the Pacific, not east toward the Atlantic. You had crossed a threshold. Part 12. The routine continues. Even in the mountains, the routine remained the same. Wake, pack, walk, stop, walk, stop, camp, sleep. The setting had changed, but the rhythm had not. You still walked beside the wagon. The wheels still turned. The oxen still plodded forward. Morning still came. Evening still came. If anything, the routine was more important in the mountains. The trail was more dangerous here. Following the established path was critical. Deviating could lead to disaster. So the wagon trains followed the ruts carved by previous trains, the same camps used by previous trains, the same river crossings. After South Pass, the trail split. Some wagon trains took a cutoff to California. Those continuing to Oregon stayed on the main trail, heading northwest toward Fort Hall in what is now Idaho. This section of the trail was difficult. Water was sometimes scarce. The trail crossed sagebrush desert, then climbed through more mountains. The wagons had to cross the Green River, the Bear River, the Snake River. Each crossing was a challenge. Some rivers could be forded if the water was low. The wagons would be driven into the water, the oxen swimming and pulling, the wagon bed often floating slightly while the wheels dragged on the riverbed. People would hold on to the wagons, crossing with them. It was dangerous. People drowned in river crossings. Other rivers required ferries. At major crossings, enterprising settlers had set up ferry operations. They would float the wagons across on crude rafts for a fee. The oxen would swim beside the raft. The emigrants would ride on the raft with the wagon, or swim, or walk across a shallow spot if there was one. Each river crossing was an event, a break in the routine. But then, across the river, the routine resumed. Walk, stop, camp, sleep. Part 13. Fort Hall and beyond. Fort Hall was another important resupply point, about 1,300 miles from Independence. By the time you reached Fort Hall, you had been on the trail for about 3 months. 3 months of walking, 3 months of dust and heat and cold nights and the same meals and the same routine. At Fort Hall, wagon trains rested and resupplied, then moved on. The trail now followed the Snake River for hundreds of miles through what is now southern Idaho. This section was desolate. The landscape was dry, rocky, sage-covered. The Snake River flowed through a canyon below the trail, often inaccessible. Water was scarce. The days grew hot. August in the Snake River plain could be brutally hot. The dust was worse than ever. The oxen suffered. Some died. When an ox died, it had to be replaced. If you had spare oxen, you used those. If not, you had to double up with another family, 2 families sharing oxen to pull both wagons. Or you abandoned your wagon and packed what you could onto the remaining animals. The trail was lined with graves. People died on the Oregon Trail. Many people. Cholera was the biggest killer, especially in the early years. The disease struck suddenly. A person could be healthy in the morning and dead by evening. Wagon trains would bury the dead and move on. There was no time for extended mourning. The train had to keep moving. Children died. Adults died. The elderly died. The graves were marked with simple wooden crosses or piles of stones, names carved or written, dates. And then the wagon train moved on, leaving the grave behind. Other dangers included accidents, falling off a wagon, being run over by a wagon wheel, gunshot wounds from careless handling of firearms, drowning in river crossings, illness, exhaustion. But most people survived. They walked on, day after day after day. Part 14. The Blue Mountains and the Columbia. The trail eventually turned northwest, climbing into the Blue Mountains of what is now northeastern Oregon. These mountains were forested, a welcome change from the sage desert. but the trail was steep and difficult. Wagons had to be lowered down steep slopes using ropes and chains. The oxen strained to pull the wagons up the other side. The Blue Mountains were the last major obstacle. After crossing them, the trail descended to the Columbia River. The emigrants could see forests again, trees, green vegetation, water. The climate was wetter here, more welcoming. But they weren't in Oregon City yet. The Columbia River Gorge presented its own challenges. Some wagon trains floated down the Columbia on rafts, a dangerous journey through rapids. Others took the Barlow Road, a toll road that went around Mount Hood. The Barlow Road was built in 1846 and provided an alternative to the river route. It was expensive, $5 per wagon, and steep and muddy, but it was safer than the river. Either way, by the time you reached the Columbia, you knew you were nearly finished. The end was in sight. After 4, 5, 6 months on the trail, the end was in sight. Part 15, Arrival. Oregon City was the end of the trail. Located at the falls of the Willamette River, it was the first incorporated city west of the Rocky Mountains. By the late 1840s, it had a few hundred residents, a handful of businesses, and a lot of new arrivals from the wagon trains. Imagine arriving, after everything, after all those miles, after all those days of walking, all those nights of sleeping on the ground, all those meals of bacon and beans, all that dust and heat and cold and rain, you arrive. The wagon pulls into Oregon City. You stop. You unhitch the oxen for the last time. You look around. This is it. The end of the trail. Oregon. What now? The promise of Oregon was free land. Under the Donation Land Claim Act of 1850, settlers could claim 320 acres if single, 640 acres if married. Free land. That was the dream. But first, you had to find your land. Claim it, build on it, clear it, plant it, survive the first winter. Oregon winters were wet, very wet. The rain was constant, different from the snow back east, but equally challenging. Many emigrants arrived in Oregon City in September or October. Too late to plant crops that year. They had to survive the winter on the supplies they had left, plus whatever they could buy or earn. Some took jobs in Oregon City. Some moved south into the Willamette Valley to settle. Some went back to work on the trail the next year, hiring themselves out as guides or working at river crossings. The dream and the reality often didn't match, but they had made it. They had survived the trail. Part 16, the cost. Let's talk about what the journey cost, not just in dollars, though we've mentioned that, but in other ways. The emigrants who travelled the Oregon Trail between 1843 and 1869 numbered somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 people. Of these, approximately 1 in 10 died on the trail. 40 to 50,000 people, 40 to 50,000 graves scattered along 2,000 miles of trail. Most died of disease. Cholera, as I mentioned, was the worst killer. It swept through wagon trains in waves, particularly in the 1849 to 1852 period during the gold rush, when traffic on the trail was heaviest. Cholera struck without warning. Severe diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration. Death could come within hours. There was no cure, no real treatment. You either survived or you didn't. Other diseases killed as well. Dysentery, typhoid, measles, mumps. These spread easily in the close quarters of a wagon train camp. Children were particularly vulnerable. Then there were the accidents. Drowning in river crossings accounted for many deaths. Firearms accidents were common. Emigrants carried rifles and pistols for hunting and protection, but many had little experience with firearms. Accidental discharges killed and wounded people regularly. Wagon accidents killed people. A person would fall beneath the wagon wheels. The heavy wheels would roll over them, crush them. Children were especially at risk. They would play around the wagons, not understanding the danger. Then, a moment of inattention and tragedy. Some people were killed by stampeding livestock. Buffalo stampedes, cattle stampedes, horses panicking and running through camp. These were rare but devastating when they occurred. Indian attacks, as I mentioned, were actually quite rare in the early years of the trail, but they did happen with increasing frequency as the years went on and relations deteriorated. The total number of emigrants killed by Native Americans during the entire trail period was probably fewer than 500 people, far fewer than died of cholera or accidents. But there were other costs beyond death. The physical toll of the journey was immense. 6 months of walking, 15 to 20 miles a day after day. People's feet were destroyed. Their legs ached constantly. They lost weight. The diet was poor, lacking in fresh vegetables and variety. Scurvy was common. Women who were pregnant faced particular hardships. Traveling pregnant, giving birth on the trail, caring for a newborn while still walking every day. Many women gave birth in the wagon or in a tent or simply on the ground beside the trail. Then they would rest for a day or two if the wagon train could spare the time, and then continue walking. The psychological toll was also significant. The stress of the journey, the fear, the uncertainty, the loss of loved ones, the monotony. 6 months of the same routine, day after day, can break a person's spirit even when nothing dramatic happens. Families fractured under the pressure. Arguments broke out. People who started the journey as friends ended it as enemies. Marriages strained. Some couples divorced after reaching Oregon, the stress of the trail having destroyed their relationship. And then there was the toll on those left behind, the Native American populations whose lands were crossed, whose game was depleted, whose lives were disrupted by the endless stream of wagons. The trail brought disease that devastated entire tribes. It brought conflict. It brought change that the native peoples had not asked for and could not stop. The buffalo herds were depleted. The grass was grazed by thousands of cattle and oxen. The firewood along the streams was cut down. The trail itself became a scar across the landscape, visible for miles. In some places, the wagon ruts cut so deep into the rock that they're still visible today, more than 170 years later. Part 17, the daily details return. But let's return to the experience of the journey itself, to the daily details, because that's what the journey was, not the dramatic moments, though those happened, but the long, slow accumulation of ordinary days. Consider the experience of a woman on the trail. She would wake before dawn as the sky was just beginning to lighten. While the men went to gather the livestock, she would rekindle the fire from the banked coals of the night before. Add fuel, get it burning. Then prepare breakfast, the same breakfast as yesterday, as every day. Put the pot on the fire, add water, add beans that have been soaking overnight. Cut bacon into the pot, set it to cooking. While the breakfast cooks, begin packing. Roll up the bedding. fold it, pack it into the wagon. The dishes from last night, cleaned before bed, are already packed. The clothes, the few precious items, everything must be arranged. Make coffee, boil water, add grounds, let it boil. The smell of coffee fills the camp. The men return with the livestock. Breakfast is served. Everyone eats quickly. There's no time to linger. The wagon train will be moving soon. After eating, wash the dishes, pack them. Help load the last items into the wagon. The men are hitching the oxen, yoke by yoke. The children are supposed to be helping, but mostly they're playing, running between the wagons, excited for the day or dreading it, depending on their temperament and age. Then the captain signals. Time to move. The woman takes her place beside the wagon. She'll walk all day, approximately 15 miles, 7 to 8 hours of actual walking, plus breaks. All in a long dress that drags in the dust, a bonnet to protect her face from the sun, shoes that are wearing thin. She walks. The wagon creaks beside her. The oxen plod ahead. Her husband walks on the other side of the oxen, or ahead of them, guiding them. The children walk nearby, sometimes ranging ahead to explore, sometimes falling behind to look at something interesting, always within earshot. The sun climbs, the air warms, the dust rises. She walks. Her mind wanders. She thinks about home, the house they left behind, her mother, her friends. Will she ever see them again? Probably not. Oregon is so far away, maybe she can write letters. But letters take months to travel back east, months for a reply to come back, if it comes at all. She thinks about Oregon. What will it be like? The land is supposed to be fertile, rain all winter, mild temperatures, trees, water, space, land of their own, a new start. She thinks about her children. Are they safe? Healthy? The youngest has been coughing. Is it serious? Probably not. Probably just the dust. But what if it's something worse? What if it's the beginning of cholera? She watches the child, listens to the cough, worries. The morning passes. Noon comes. The wagon train stops. Unhitch the oxen. Let them graze. Eat a quick meal. Rest. Then hitch the oxen again. Continue walking. The afternoon is long, longer than the morning. The heat is worse. The dust is worse. Her feet hurt. Her legs ache. The baby is fussy. She carries the baby in a sling while she walks. The baby is heavy. Her back hurts. But she walks, one foot in front of the other, the wagon beside her, the wheels turning, around and around, creak and roll, creak and roll. Finally, evening. The wagon train stops for the night. Circle the wagons. Unhitch the oxen. Now the evening work begins. Gather fuel. Usually buffalo chips at this point. The children help, collecting them in a bag. Start the fire. Fetch water from the river or stream if there is one. If not, use water from the barrel on the wagon. Prepare dinner, the same dinner as every night. Beans, bacon, maybe some cornbread if there's time and flour. Coffee, always coffee. While dinner cooks, tend to the children. Wash their faces and hands if there's water to spare. Check them for injuries. Make sure they're ready for bed. Dinner is served, everyone eats, the dishes are washed, the camp is secured, the children are put to bed. Then, finally, she can sit, rest, maybe talk with her husband about the day, about the journey, about their plans. Then sleep, under the wagon or in it, depending on the weather and the space available. Sleep while you can, because dawn comes early, and then it all begins again. Wake, pack, walk. Stop, walk. Stop, camp, sleep, wake, pack, walk. Stop, walk. Stop, Camp, Sleep. Part 18, The Seasons. The Oregon Trail could only be traveled during certain months. This timing shaped the entire experience. Wagon trains left Independence in April or May. Too early, and the prairie grass wouldn't be high enough to feed the livestock. Too late, and you risked being caught in the mountains by snow. The mountain passes closed in October or early November. If you weren't through by then, you were trapped. The most famous example of being trapped was the Donner Party. In 1846, a group of emigrants took a supposed shortcut called the Hastings Cutoff. The cutoff proved to be longer and more difficult than the established trail. The Donner Party was delayed. When they reached the Sierra Nevada mountains in late October, early snow trapped them. They spent the winter in the mountains. Nearly half of them died. The survivors resorted to cannibalism to stay alive. This tragedy reinforced the importance of timing. Leave on time. Keep moving. Don't take shortcuts. Don't delay. Get through the mountains before the snow. The spring departure meant that the early part of the journey across Kansas and Nebraska occurred in late spring and early summer. May and June on the prairie. The grass was green, wildflowers bloomed. The weather was usually pleasant, though thunderstorms could be fierce. The prairie thunderstorms came suddenly, with violent winds and hail. Lightning struck the open plain with terrifying frequency. During storms, families would huddle in or under the wagons, waiting for it to pass. By the time the wagon trains reached the mountains, it was July or August, summer in the mountains. The days were warm, the nights cool, the timing was deliberate. The high passes needed to be clear of snow. By the time the trains reached the Columbia River or the Willamette Valley, it was September or October. Fall in Oregon. The rainy season was beginning. The emigrants arrived tired, worn down, at the beginning of the wettest time of year in one of the wettest places in North America. This seasonal progression was the same for every wagon train, every year. Part of the routine, the spring departure, the summer crossing, the fall arrival, year after year after year. Part 19. The sounds of the trail. Let me describe the sounds. Close your eyes and listen. The morning begins with silence, the deep silence of the prairie before dawn. Then, gradually, the camp wakes. The first sounds are quiet, someone stirring, footsteps on the grass. The rustle of blankets being folded, a low voice, a child's sleepy question. Then the fire crackling as it's brought back to life. The sound of wood or buffalo chips being added, the pop and snap of the fire growing. The oxen and cattle and horses make their sounds. Oxen are generally quiet, but they low occasionally, a deep, rumbling sound. Horses whinny, cattle moo. The sound of many animals carries across the camp. Men calling to each other, coordinating the gathering of the livestock. Footsteps, many footsteps, the jingle of harnesses and chains. Then the sounds of breakfast, the clatter of pots, the sizzle of bacon in the pan. The smell comes with the sound. Coffee boiling, water being poured. Quiet conversations as families eat. The camp grows louder as everyone prepares to leave. The sounds of packing, canvas being folded, wooden chests being closed, the thump of items being loaded into wagons. Children's voices, higher pitched, excited or complaining. The oxen being hitched, the creak of leather, the clink of metal on metal as the chains are attached. Men talking to the animals, commands, encouragements. Then the captain's call, "Move out," or "Roll," or whatever signal has been established. The crack of whips, not striking the animals, but cracking in the air. A sound like a gunshot. The wagons begin to move. This is the sound that defines the trail. The creak of wood, the wagon bed shifting on its axles, the wheels beginning to turn, around and around, the creak and groan of wood under stress. The footsteps. Hundreds of footsteps, people walking, oxen walking, a rhythm, a steady beat, crunch, crunch, crunch on the grass, on the dirt, on the rocks. As the day progresses, the sounds layer, the constant creak of the wagons, the footsteps, the occasional call of a driver to his oxen, "Gee," to turn right, "Haw," to turn left, "Whoa," to stop. Children's voices calling to each other, running ahead, falling behind, laughing, crying, the sounds of children. The wind. On the open prairie, the wind is constant. It blows across the grass with a sound like the ocean, a rushing, shushing sound, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce. Midday brings the sounds of the noon stop, the wagons stopping, the oxen being unhitched but not unyoked, the animals breathing heavily, the people breathing heavily, everyone tired. The sounds of eating, drinking, quiet conversation, but not much. Everyone is saving their energy. Then the sounds of starting again, the same as before. Hitch the oxen, the wagons begin to move, the wheels turn, creak and roll, creak and roll. The footsteps resume. The afternoon sounds are the same as the morning sounds, but heavier, more laboured. The oxen are tired, their breathing is louder, the people are tired. Less conversation, just walking. The steady rhythm of wheels and footsteps. Evening brings different sounds. The wagon train stops. The circle is formed. The oxen are unhitched. Now you can hear them grazing. The sound of grass being torn and chewed. A peaceful sound. Fires being started. The crack of wood or the dull thump of buffalo chips being dropped. Flames crackling. Water being poured. Pots clanging. The sounds of cooking. Children playing in the evening light. Running. Shouting. Released from the day's walking, they have energy again. Their voices fill the camp. As darkness falls, the sounds change again. Conversations around the fires, adults talking, sometimes someone playing a fiddle or harmonica. Music was rare on the trail, but treasured when it happened. The simple melodies floating across the camp. The sounds of preparation for sleep, bedrolls being spread, children being settled, quiet voices, lullabies. Then night. The sounds of many people sleeping, breathing, snoring, a cough, a baby crying. The sounds of the night watch, footsteps of the guards walking around the perimeter. The distant howl of coyotes. The wind, always the wind. And underneath it all, if a buffalo herd is near, the deep rumble of thousands of large animals, a sound felt as much as heard. These sounds, day after day after day, week after week, month after month. The soundtrack of the Oregon Trail, Part 20, What They Left Behind. Every wagon train left a trail of discarded items. The emigrants learned quickly that they had packed too much. The oxen couldn't pull the weight, so things had to be thrown out. In the early days, near Independence, the trail was lined with furniture, rocking chairs, dressers, tables, heavy wooden items that seemed essential back home but became burdens on the trail. These were left beside the path, hoping someone else might want them. Later, wagons would pass them, also too loaded, unable to take them. Books were common casualties. Heavy books, family Bibles sometimes, though those were kept if at all possible. But other books, novels, histories were left behind, piled beside the trail. Pages fluttering in the wind, clothing, trunks of clothing were emptied, the contents sorted. Keep only the essential, the rest was left. Dresses, coats, shoes, all left beside the trail, slowly ruined by weather. Tools, extra tools were discarded, duplicate items, anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Food, if supplies ran low and the wagon still struggled, even food was discarded. Bags of flour, barrels of bacon, left beside the trail where they might help the next wagon train or might not. By the time the wagon trains reached the mountains, the trail was a museum of abandoned dreams. Every item represented something someone thought they needed, something they brought from home, something they couldn't bear to leave behind until they had no choice. The most heartbreaking items were the personal ones, the china dishes, the wedding dress, the grandfather clock, things that connected the emigrants to their past, to their families, to their old lives. These were sacrificed to the practical demands of the journey. But some things were never abandoned. The Bible, usually, a fiddle or musical instrument, if the family had one, a few items of sentimental value that weighed almost nothing, letters from home, photographs, daguerreotypes, if they had them. These items made it to Oregon, carried 2,000 miles, surviving the journey because they were light enough to carry and too precious to abandon. Part 21. The Wagon Train Community. A wagon train was a temporary community, families who had never met before joining together for the journey, living in close proximity for months, cooperating, sometimes conflicting. The wagon train typically elected a captain at the beginning of the journey, as I mentioned. This person made decisions about when to start and stop each day, where to camp, how to handle disputes. The captain's authority was real but limited. If people disagreed strongly enough with the captain, they could vote him out and elect a new one. This happened sometimes. The wagon trains also needed other roles. Scouts to ride ahead and find the best path, the best camping spots. Hunters to provide fresh meat. Guards to watch the livestock at night. These roles rotated or were assigned based on who was willing and capable. Disputes arose. With so many families living so closely together for so long, conflict was inevitable. Arguments about who was pulling their weight, about whose livestock was wandering into others' space, about children misbehaving, about everything and nothing. The captain and a council of men would adjudicate disputes. These trail courts were informal but taken seriously. Justice had to be maintained, or the wagon train would fall apart. Most disputes were minor and resolved quickly, but occasionally serious conflicts arose. Fights, theft, once in a great while, violence. In extreme cases, a family could be expelled from the wagon train, forced to continue alone or with another train. This was rare but devastating when it happened. Travelling alone was far more dangerous than travelling with a train. But mostly, the wagon train community functioned. People helped each other. When a wagon broke down, others stopped to help with repairs. When someone was sick, others provided care. When someone died, others helped dig the grave and conduct the brief funeral service. Children from different families played together. Adults formed friendships, some of which lasted after reaching Oregon. Young people fell in love and married. Babies were born. Life continued even on the trail. On Sunday, if possible, the wagon train would rest. No travel on the Sabbath. Instead, there would be a church service. Someone would read from the Bible. Someone would lead hymns. Everyone would gather. This was tradition, routine, comfort. The Sunday rest also allowed for necessary chores: washing clothes, mending clothes, repairing equipment, writing letters home, resting tired feet. The animals also needed the rest. A day without walking was crucial for their health. Then Monday would come, and the journey would resume. Walk, stop, camp, sleep, the routine. Part 22, the endless middle. Let me bring us back to the feeling of the journey. Not the events, but the experience. The endless middle part of the trip, when you're weeks from where you started and weeks from where you're going. You've been walking for 2 months, 8 weeks, 60 days, more or less. Every day has been the same. Wake, pack, walk, stop, walk, stop, camp, sleep, every day. 60 days. You're somewhere in what is now Wyoming. You've passed Chimney Rock, you've passed Scotts Bluff, you've passed Fort Laramie. You're following the North Platte River, then the Sweetwater River. The landscape is more rugged now, but it's still fundamentally the same. Walk, walk, walk. Your body has adapted to the routine. The blisters on your feet have become calluses. Your legs no longer ache every evening. You're thinner. Everyone is thinner. The diet and the constant exercise have worn away any extra weight. You're muscular in a lean, exhausted way. Your mind has adapted too. The initial excitement of the journey has faded. The anxiety has faded. Even the fear has faded. You've settled into a kind of numb acceptance. This is your life now. Walking. You walk because everyone walks. You walk because the wagon train moves forward. You walk because Oregon is ahead and there's no going back. You don't think about much while you walk. Your mind is mostly quiet. Sometimes you think about the past, your old home, your old life. It seems like a dream now. Did you really live in a house that stayed in one place? Did you really have neighbors you saw every day for years? Sometimes you think about the future, Oregon, land, a farm, a new life. But these thoughts are abstract. You can't really imagine it anymore. The only real thing is the walking, the wagon, the dust, the endless sky. Sometimes you think about nothing at all. You just walk, one foot in front of the other. The rhythm of walking becomes meditation. Step, 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 step. The landmarks help. When you see Independence Rock ahead, you have something to focus on. Each day it gets a little closer. Then you're beside it. Then it's behind you. That's progress. Measurable progress. But between landmarks, there's nothing to measure. Just the walking. The country changes so slowly that you don't notice it changing. The grass is perhaps a little shorter today than yesterday. The horizon is perhaps a little more distant. The soil is perhaps a little more rocky, but the changes are so gradual that each day looks like the last. This is the true nature of the Oregon Trail. Not adventure, not danger, though danger existed, but monotony, profound, deep, relentless monotony. The same routine, day after day after day, for months. And yet you endure it, because you have to. because everyone else is enduring it, because Oregon is ahead, because you've come too far to turn back, because this is what you chose and you have to see it through. So you walk, and the wagon creaks beside you, and the wheels turn around and around and around, and the sun rises and the sun sets, and you make camp and you break camp, and you sleep and you wake, and you do it all again. Part 23. The small joys. Despite the monotony, there were small joys, moments that broke the routine in pleasant ways. A clear stream with cold water. After days of muddy river water, finding a spring or clear stream was wonderful. The water tasted clean. You could drink your fill without worrying about sediment. You could wash your face, your hands. If there was time, you could even bathe, though privacy was limited and time usually short. Fresh meat. When the hunters brought back antelope or buffalo, the camp would feast. Fresh meat was a luxury compared to the constant bacon. It tasted better. It lifted spirits. Even the act of preparing it was something different, a break from routine. Wildflowers. The prairie in late spring and early summer was covered with wildflowers. Vast fields of colour, blue, yellow, purple, red. Children would pick them. Women would arrange small bouquets. These flowers lasted only a day or two, but they were beautiful. A perfect campsite. Sometimes the evening stop would be at an ideal location. Good water, plenty of grass for the livestock, flat ground for sleeping, maybe even some trees for shade. These camps felt like gifts. Everyone rested a little easier. Mail from home. At the forts, Fort Laramie or Fort Hall, there was sometimes mail waiting. Letters from family back east sent months earlier, following the trail to catch up with the wagon trains. Receiving a letter was a treasure, a connection to home, news of family, proof that you were remembered, music in the evening. When someone played a fiddle or harmonica, others would gather around the fire. Maybe someone would sing. Simple songs, familiar hymns, ballads. The music connected everyone, reminded them of home, gave them something to focus on besides the journey. Children playing. Watching children play, seeing them have moments of normalcy and joy despite the hardship, was uplifting for the adults. Children adapted better than adults in some ways. For them, the trail became normal. They found joy in simple things, a pretty rock, a grasshopper, a game of tag between the wagons. Clear skies at night. The stars on the prairie were spectacular. With no artificial light for hundreds of miles, the sky was dense with stars. The Milky Way stretched overhead, so bright it cast shadows. On clear nights, people would lie on their bedrolls and stare upward, amazed. These small joys didn't erase the hardship, but they punctuated it. They gave people something to remember besides the dust and the walking and the monotony. Part 24. The final push. After South Pass, after Fort Hall, after the long journey through Idaho along the Snake River, the wagon trains turned northwest into Oregon Territory. This final section brought new challenges. The Blue Mountains were steep and forested. The trail climbed through them, then descended. The descent was particularly difficult. Wagons had to be lowered down slopes using ropes tied to trees. Teams of oxen pulling backward, acting as brakes. Men guiding the wagon, ensuring it didn't tip or slide out of control. This work was exhausting. Each wagon had to be lowered individually. If the wagon train had 40 wagons, it might take all day to get them down a single steep slope, but slowly, one by one, they descended. After the Blue Mountains came the Columbia River. By this point, it was likely September or even early October. The emigrants had been on the trail for 5 months, 20 weeks, 140 days approximately. They were so close to the end, but they still had to get down the Columbia River Gorge. As I mentioned, some chose to float down the river on rafts. Others took the Barlow Road around Mount Hood. Both options had their dangers. Those who rafted faced rapids. The Columbia River Gorge was beautiful but treacherous. The current was swift. Rafts could capsize, wagons could be lost, people could drown. Many did. After surviving the entire trail, some emigrants died within a few days of their destination. Those who took the Barlow Road faced steep grades, deep mud, and the cost of the toll, but it was generally safer than the river. Either way, by late September or early October, the wagon trains reached the Willamette Valley, green, wet, forested. This was Oregon. This was the destination. Oregon City sat at the falls of the Willamette River. The emigrants arrived, tired, worn, often sick, always changed by the journey. They had walked approximately 2,000 miles. For 5 or 6 months, every day, walking. Now it was over. The journey was complete. They had survived the Oregon Trail. Part 25. Reflection. Let's pause here and reflect on what this journey meant, what it was. The Oregon Trail was not an adventure in the romantic sense. It was not exciting. It was not glorious. It was hard, repetitive, dangerous, and monotonous. People undertook it out of necessity or ambition, not for fun. The emigrants were seeking better lives, land, opportunity, freedom from the constraints of the eastern states. Oregon promised all of this: free land, fertile soil, mild climate, a fresh start. But the cost was high: months of walking, loss of possessions, often loss of loved ones, the psychological toll of the journey, the fear, the uncertainty, the sheer exhaustion of it all. And yet they came, tens of thousands of them, year after year. They left their homes, packed their wagons, and walked west into the unknown. They walked past the graves of those who had gone before. They walked past the abandoned wagons. They walked through their own doubts and fears. Why? What drove them? The promise of land was part of it. But there was something else, a belief that the future could be better than the past, that by enduring hardship they could create something new, that by walking 2,000 miles they could reach a place where life would be better for themselves and their children. This belief sustained them through the monotonous days, through the dust and heat, through the cold nights, through the losses, through everything. The Oregon Trail was an act of faith, faith that Oregon existed and was worth reaching, faith that they could survive the journey, faith that the suffering would be temporary and the reward would be lasting. For many, this faith was justified. They reached Oregon, they claimed land, they built farms and lives. Their children grew up in Oregon, never knowing the hardship of the trail except through their parents' stories. For others, the faith was betrayed. They died on the trail, or they reached Oregon only to find that reality didn't match the dream. The land was difficult to clear. The winters were harsh in their own way. The isolation was profound. Some gave up and returned east. Some moved on to California, some stayed and struggled, but all of them, whether successful or not, whether survivor or victim, whether satisfied or disappointed, all of them undertook the journey. All of them walked the trail. All of them experienced the monotony and the routine and the endless turning of the wagon wheels. Part 26, The Legacy. The Oregon Trail shaped America. That might sound grandiose, but it's true. The settlement of Oregon Territory and later Washington Territory was enabled by the trail. Tens of thousands of American settlers created a population that secured American control of the region. Before the wagon trains came, Oregon was disputed territory. Both the United States and Britain claimed it. The border between British and American territory was unclear. It was the flood of American settlers that tipped the balance. In 1846, the Oregon Treaty established the border at the 49th parallel, giving the United States clear control of what is now Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. This was achieved not through military conquest, but through migration, through wagon trains, through families walking across the continent. The trail also established patterns of western migration that continued for decades. The routes, the timing, the methods developed on the Oregon Trail were used by later emigrants going to California, Utah, and other western territories. The trail was a template, and the trail lived in American memory. It became part of the national mythology. The covered wagon, the pioneer family, the journey west. These images became symbols of American character, determination, self-reliance, the willingness to endure hardship for a better future. Of course, this mythology often obscured the reality. The real Oregon Trail was not glorious. It was not an adventure story. It was a 6-month slog through dust and monotony, punctuated by moments of terror and tragedy. But the mythology persisted because people needed it. The idea of the pioneer journey became a way of understanding American identity. The belief that Americans were people who didn't accept limits, who pushed boundaries, who endured hardship to achieve dreams. Whether this mythology is accurate or healthy is debatable, but it's undeniably powerful. The Oregon Trail lives in American imagination even now, more than 150 years after the last wagon trains crossed it. Part 27, The Physical Trail Today. The Oregon Trail still exists as a physical place. You can visit it, walk on it, see the wagon ruts that were worn into the rock and soil. In some places, the trail has been obliterated by modern development. Towns and cities were built over it, highways cover it, farms have ploughed it under. But in other places, especially in the remote sections across Wyoming and Idaho, the trail remains. The wagon ruts are the most visible remnant. In rocky areas, where hundreds of thousands of wagon wheels rolled over the same path year after year, the ruts were carved deep. At a place called Guernsey, Wyoming, the ruts are cut 5 feet deep into the sandstone hillside. You can stand in them, run your hand along the smooth stone worn by wagon wheels. In other places, the trail appears as parallel lines across the prairie. Not a single rut, but many. The wagon trains spread out to avoid each other's dust, creating multiple parallel paths. From the air, these paths look like faint scars in the landscape. Some sections of the trail are preserved as historical sites. You can visit them, walk where the emigrants walked, stand where they stood, see what they saw. The landscape hasn't changed as much as you might think. The prairie is still vast. The sky is still enormous. The silence is still profound. There are markers along the trail, historical signs, monuments. At Chimney Rock, there's a visitors center. At Scotts Bluff, there's a national monument. These sites try to tell the story of the trail to help modern visitors understand what the journey was like. But it's hard to convey the reality. Standing beside your car, reading a historical marker, looking at the landscape for 10 minutes, you can't really understand what it was like to walk this path for 6 months. To see this landscape day after day for weeks on end, to feel the dust and heat and exhaustion. The graves are mostly gone. A few marked graves remain, protected as historical sites. But most graves were unmarked or marked with simple wooden crosses that rotted away long ago. The dead of the Oregon Trail lie scattered along its length, their exact locations lost to time. The artifacts are mostly gone too. The furniture, the clothing, the tools left beside the trail were scavenged by later travelers or rotted away or were buried by shifting soil. Museums have some artifacts, wagon parts, personal items, things that were preserved by chance or by descendants. But the trail itself remains, not as it was, but as a ghost of what it was, a memory in the landscape. A place where, if you know the history, you can stand and imagine the long lines of wagons, the clouds of dust, the sound of wheels and footsteps, the faces of people who passed this way more than 150 years ago. Part 28, Returning to the Rhythm. Let's return one more time to the experience itself, to the daily rhythm of the trail, because that's what defined it. Not the landmarks or the dangers or the destinations, but the routine. Imagine you're in the middle of the journey, week 10. You've been walking for 70 days. You'll be walking for 50 more days at least, maybe 60, maybe 70. You don't know exactly. It depends on weather, on conditions, on how well the oxen hold up. But today, right now, this day, it's like every other day. You wake, the sky is lightening, dawn is coming. Around you, the camp is stirring, the sounds of morning, fire, voices, animals. You fold your bedding, pack it in the wagon. Your movements are automatic now. You don't think about what you're doing. Your hands know the routine. Breakfast, coffee, bacon, beans. The same as always. You eat standing up or sitting on the wagon tongue. There's no table, there's no chair. There's just food and the need to eat it quickly. The men hitch the oxen. You help pack the last items. Then the captain's call. Time to move. You take your place beside the wagon. The oxen lean into the yoke. The wagon begins to move. The wheels turn. You begin to walk. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. The sun rises behind you. It will climb over your head and set ahead of you because you're walking west, always west, toward Oregon. The landscape scrolls by. You've stopped really looking at it. It's just background now. Grass, sky, hills in the distance. You note them without conscious thought. Your mind drifts. You think about nothing in particular. Maybe you count your steps for a while. 1, 2, 3, 4. After 100, you lose count and start over. Or you don't start over. You just walk without counting. The wagon creaks, a constant sound. Wood flexing under weight, axles turning, wheels rolling over the uneven ground. Creak, roll, creak, roll, creak, roll. The oxen breathe heavily. You can hear them, the sound of large animals working, steady, patient. They don't complain, they just pull. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher, the air warms, the dust rises. You're coated in it now. Everyone is. Grey dust on clothes, on skin, in hair, in eyes, in mouth. You taste it with every breath. Midday. The train stops. Unhitch the oxen. Let them rest. Eat something. Drink something. Rest yourself. Your feet hurt. Always hurt. The hurt is normal now. You don't think about it. Then start again. Hitch the oxen. Fall into line. Begin walking. Left foot. Right foot. Left foot. Right foot. The afternoon stretches out. Endless. Longer than the morning. The heat is worse. The dust is worse. The fatigue is worse. But you walk because everyone walks. Because the train moves forward. Because Oregon is ahead. You think about water. When will the evening stop be? Will there be water? Good water? The thought of cold, clear water is intensely appealing, but you might not get it. You might get muddy river water, or you might camp dry and ration what remains in the barrels. You think about sitting down, about stopping, about rest, but you can't stop, not yet, so you walk. The shadows lengthen, the sun drops toward the horizon. Finally, the captain signals, stop for the night. Circle the wagons, unhitch the oxen. Now you can stop walking, now you can sit. But you can't sit for long, there's work to do. Gather fuel, start the fire, fetch water, prepare dinner, the same dinner as every night. Beans, bacon, coffee. You move through these tasks automatically. Your body knows what to do. While your hands work, your mind is blank. Or nearly blank. Just tired. So tired. Dinner, clean up. Bedding laid out. Children settled. Then finally you lie down. The ground is hard beneath you. The sky is vast above you. You're exhausted. Sleep comes quickly, dreamlessly. Deep sleep of complete physical exhaustion. And in the morning, you'll wake and do it all again. Because that's what you do. That's what everyone does. Wake, pack, walk, stop, walk, stop, camp, sleep. The wheels turn, around and around and around, day after day after day. This is the Oregon Trail. Part 29. The weather. Let me tell you about the weather on the trail, because the weather was a constant presence, a force that shaped every day. In the early part of the journey, across Kansas and Nebraska in May and June, the weather was variable. Some days were perfect. Clear skies, moderate temperatures, a light breeze. These days made the walking almost pleasant. But other days brought storms. The prairie thunderstorms were violent. They came on suddenly, building from nothing to full fury in less than an hour. The sky would darken, the wind would rise. Then the rain would come, sheets of rain, torrential rain, rain so heavy you couldn't see the wagon in front of you. Lightning struck the open prairie with frightening frequency, bright flashes, immediate thunder, the smell of ozone. People and animals could be struck. It happened. The emigrants would huddle under or in the wagons, hoping the storm would pass quickly. Hail sometimes came with the storms, hailstones the size of eggs. They would batter the canvas wagon covers, kill small animals, bruise people caught in the open. After a hailstorm, the ground would be white with ice, even in summer. Then the storm would pass. The sky would clear, the sun would come out. Within an hour, the ground would be drying. By evening, it would be as if the storm had never happened, except for the puddles and the damage left behind. As the wagon trains moved into higher elevations, into Wyoming and towards South Pass, the temperature dropped. Even in July and August, the nights at high elevation were cold. Frost on the ground some mornings. People who had packed away their winter coats would dig them out again. The days could still be hot. The sun at high altitude was intense. People sunburned easily, lips cracked, skin dried and peeled, but the nights were cold. This daily swing from hot days to cold nights was exhausting in its own way. In the mountains, the weather was even more unpredictable. A clear morning could become a storm-filled afternoon. Rain could turn to sleet. Snow was possible even in summer at the highest elevations. And always, there was the wind. On the plains, the wind never stopped. It blew constantly, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce. It dried everything: lips, skin, clothes. It carried the dust. It wore on people psychologically. The constant wind, day after day, week after week, was maddening. By the time the wagon trains reached Oregon in September or October, the rainy season was beginning. The famous Oregon rain, not the violent thunderstorms of the prairie, but steady, persistent rain. Rain that fell for days. Rain that turned the trails to mud. Rain that soaked through canvas and cloth and made everything damp and miserable. The weather was beyond anyone's control. You endured it. That was all you could do. Good weather made the journey easier. Bad weather made it harder. But either way, you kept moving. Because the seasons didn't wait. Winter was coming. You had to reach Oregon before the mountain passes closed. Part 30. The livestock. The oxen deserve more attention. They were essential to the journey. Without them, there was no journey. The wagon couldn't move without oxen to pull it. A typical wagon was pulled by 4 to 6 oxen. Oxen are castrated male cattle. They're strong, patient, and relatively easy to manage. They work in yoked pairs. The yoke is a wooden beam that fits across their necks, connecting them and distributing the weight of the load they're pulling. The oxen had to be trained. You couldn't just yoke any cattle and expect them to pull together. They had to learn to respond to commands. G for right, haw for left, whoa for stop. They had to learn to work as a team, to pull evenly, to move together. Each ox had a name. The emigrants named their oxen and talked to them. These animals were working partners, not just beasts of burden. A good ox team was valuable. Men took pride in having well-trained, strong oxen. The oxen walked all day, just like the people, 15 to 20 miles a day, day after day. They pulled loads weighing 2,000 pounds or more. They did this for months. The physical demand was enormous. Keeping the oxen healthy was crucial. They needed grass. Good prairie grass provided most of their nutrition. The wagon trains had to time their stops to allow the oxen to graze. At the noon break, the oxen would graze for an hour or two. In the evening, they would graze until dark, and then again in the morning before the day's travel began. They needed water. The oxen had to drink several gallons of water each day. When the wagon train camped near a river or stream, this wasn't a problem. But on dry stretches, water for the oxen became a serious concern. The water barrels on the wagons were mostly for people. The oxen had to wait until the next water source which might be a day or more away. The oxen suffered in the heat. On the hottest days, especially crossing the Sage Desert in Idaho, the oxen would be visibly distressed, panting, slowing. Some collapsed, some died. When an ox died, it had to be replaced immediately, or the wagon couldn't continue. Spare oxen, if a family had them, were essential. But spare oxen also had to eat and drink, increasing the burden on resources. Most families started with more oxen than they needed and hoped not to lose too many along the way. The oxen's hooves wore down on the rocky trail. Sometimes they went lame. A lame ox couldn't pull, so it became another burden. It might recover with rest, but the wagon train rarely stopped long enough for recovery. A lame ox often had to be left behind or slaughtered for meat. Diseases affected the oxen too. They could contract infections, parasites, illness. A sick ox was a liability. The emigrants did what they could to treat sick animals, but veterinary medicine was limited. Many oxen died of illness. Despite all this, the oxen persevered. They were remarkably sturdy animals. They could survive on poor grass and limited water. They could work in heat and cold. They could walk 20 miles a day for months on end. Without their strength and endurance, the Oregon Trail would not have been possible. At the end of the journey, the oxen that survived were often in poor condition, thin, worn down, but they had done their job. They had pulled the wagons across 2,000 miles. Some were kept by their owners and used as farm animals in Oregon. Others were sold. Some were simply turned loose, their working lives over. Part 31. Time moves differently. One of the most disorienting aspects of the Oregon Trail was how it changed your relationship with time. In the settled East, time was measured in clock hours, in daily routines tied to morning and evening, in weeks measured by Sundays, in seasons tied to planting and harvest. On the trail, clock time became irrelevant. Most emigrants didn't carry pocket watches, and those who did rarely consulted them. Time was measured by the sun, dawn, midday, dusk, dark. These were the only hours that mattered. The day was divided into simple segments: morning travel, noon break, afternoon travel, evening camp. Each segment blended into the next. You didn't think, it's 3 o'clock. You thought, the sun is past its peak, or we should stop soon. Weeks blurred together. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, these names became meaningless. The only day that maintained its identity was Sunday, and only because the wagon trains tried to rest on Sundays. But even Sunday was just a break in the routine, not a true marker of time. Months were measured by landmarks. You left Independence in late April. By late May, you were somewhere past Fort Kearny. By late June, somewhere past Fort Laramie. By late July, somewhere near South Pass. By late August, somewhere in Idaho. By late September, approaching Oregon. The months marked progress, but they didn't feel like months. They felt like stages of an endless journey. The strange thing was that time felt both fast and slow. Each day was slow. The hours of walking seemed to last forever. The afternoon especially seemed to stretch on without end. Each minute was long. But looking back, the weeks passed quickly. Had it really been 2 months since you left Independence? It seemed like yesterday. It seemed like forever. Both were true. This distortion of time was disorienting. Emigrants wrote about it in their diaries. The feeling that time had stopped, that they would walk forever, or the opposite feeling that time was racing past and they weren't making enough progress. Part of this was the repetitive routine. When every day is the same, the days blend together. You lose track. You can't remember if something happened 3 days ago or 5 days ago. It all merges into one continuous experience of walking. Part of it was the removal from normal life. There were no external time markers, no church bells, no factory whistles, no newspapers with dates, just the sun and the wagon and the trail. Some emigrants tried to maintain a normal sense of time. They kept careful diaries dating each entry. They noted the day of the week. They observed Sunday as a day of rest and worship. This helped them maintain a structure, a sense of continuity with their former lives. But for many, time on the trail became a different thing entirely, not hours and days and weeks, but simply a continuous present, walking, stopping, walking, stopping, over and over, until eventually, finally, you reached the end. Part 32, The Children's Experience. Children on the Oregon Trail had a very different experience from adults. For children, especially young children, the trail became normal remarkably quickly. A 6-year-old who left Independence in late April barely remembered the settled life they'd left behind by the time they reached Oregon in September. 5 months was a significant portion of their young life. The trail was their reality. Children adapted to the walking. They walked beside the wagons with the adults, though their shorter legs meant they had to work harder to keep up. Young children sometimes rode in the wagon, but this was uncomfortable and discouraged. The wagon was too full and too rough riding. Better to walk. Children made games of the journey. They would race ahead of their family's wagon, then fall back. They would search for interesting rocks or insects. They would play with children from other families in the wagon train. Tag, hide and seek, though there was nowhere to hide on the open prairie. Simple games that passed the time. Older children had responsibilities. Boys helped with the livestock, learning to herd the cattle and oxen. Girls helped with cooking and mending and caring for younger siblings. These responsibilities were serious. A 10-year-old on the Oregon Trail was expected to contribute real work to the family's survival. But children were still children. They complained when they were tired. They cried when they were hurt. They got into mischief. Adults on the trail often marveled at children's resilience and energy. While the adults were exhausted, the children would still find energy to play in the evening camp. School was impossible on the trail. There was no time for formal education. Some mothers tried to teach reading and writing in the evenings, but this was difficult. Mostly, the children's education paused for the duration of the journey. They would resume schooling once they reached Oregon, if schooling was available. The dangers of the trail affected children differently than adults. Young children didn't fully understand the dangers. They didn't know that wandering away from the wagon train was dangerous. They didn't know that playing near the wagon wheels could be fatal. They had to be watched constantly. Older children understood the dangers better, but they were still impulsive. They took risks. They explored. Some children were injured or killed in accidents. Others died of disease. The death of a child was devastating for the family and the wagon train, but the journey continued. There was no choice. Despite everything, many children thrived. The constant outdoor life, the physical activity, the simplicity of the routine, some children adapted to this better than adults. They grew strong. They learned skills. They experienced an adventure that, while difficult and dangerous, was also unlike anything they would experience again. For children who survived the journey and grew up in Oregon, the Oregon Trail was a formative experience. It became a story they told their own children and grandchildren the time they walked across the continent. The time before Oregon, the journey that shaped everything that came after. Part 33, The Quiet Desperation. There's something I haven't fully addressed. The psychological weight of the journey. The quiet desperation that set in after weeks and months on the trail. Imagine you've been walking for 3 months, 90 days. You're tired in a way you've never been tired before. Not just physical exhaustion, though that's part of it, but a deeper fatigue, a weariness of the soul. You're tired of walking, tired of the wagon, tired of the dust, tired of beans and bacon, tired of sleeping on the ground, tired of the same faces day after day, tired of the vast empty landscape, tired of having nowhere to go except forward. You want a bed, a real bed, with a mattress and sheets and pillows. You want a roof over your head, walls around you, a door you can close, privacy, space, quiet. You want food that tastes like something, fresh bread, vegetables, fruit, meat that isn't bacon, coffee that isn't full of grounds, clean water. You want a bath, a real bath, hot water, soap, the ability to get truly clean for the first time in months. You want to stop moving, to stay in one place, to wake up in the morning and not have to pack everything and start walking, to spend a day, a week, a month in the same location. But you can't have any of these things, not yet. Oregon is still weeks away, maybe a month, maybe more, so you have to keep walking, keep enduring, keep hoping that the end will eventually come. This hope becomes strained. In the beginning, Oregon was a dream, exciting, full of possibility. But after months of hardship, Oregon becomes less a dream and more a desperate need. You need the journey to end. You need to arrive. The need is almost painful. Some people broke under this psychological weight. They became depressed, silent. They performed their duties mechanically, but with no spirit. They walked like automatons, present in body, but absent in mind. Some people became irritable, quick to anger, snapping at family members, fighting with other emigrants. The constant close quarters and lack of privacy wore on people. Small annoyances became major irritations. Some people simply endured. They shut down emotionally, stopped feeling much of anything, just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on surviving one more day. This emotional numbness was a coping mechanism. It allowed people to continue functioning when continuing seemed impossible. The diary entries reflect this. Early entries are full of observations and emotions. Later entries become sparse. Travelled 15 miles, camped by river, nothing else, no commentary, no reflection, just the bare facts. The writer had nothing left to give to the diary. But people kept moving, even in despair, even in numbness, even in quiet desperation. They kept walking, because what else could they do? Turning back was not an option. Stopping was not an option. The only way out was through. And eventually, the end did come. Oregon appeared, the journey concluded. The emigrants could stop walking, they had survived. And survival, even after everything, even in despair, was a victory. Part 34, The Final Approach. let me describe the final days of the journey, when Oregon was close, when the end was finally, truly near. After the Blue Mountains, after the Columbia River, the wagon train descended into the Willamette Valley. This was different from anything they'd seen on the trail. Green, lush, trees everywhere, rain, mild temperatures even in early fall. The emigrants noticed the change immediately. Real forests, grass that was vibrant green, not dry prairie grass. Streams with cold, clear water. The air smelled different, wet, rich, alive. After months of prairie and desert and mountains, the Willamette Valley seemed like paradise. It was what they had imagined Oregon would be, what they had walked 2,000 miles to reach. But they were also exhausted, too exhausted to fully appreciate it. They noticed the beauty, but through a haze of fatigue. They were almost there, almost done. That was what mattered. The trail here was muddy. The Oregon rains had begun. The wagon wheels sank into the mud. Progress was slow, but it was the last stretch. Just a few more days, maybe a week. Other wagon trains were ahead of them and behind them. The trail was busy in early fall, with trains all converging on Oregon City. There was a sense of collective relief. Everyone had made it, or almost made it, just a little farther. Then, finally, Oregon City, a small settlement beside the Willamette Falls, a few buildings, some cabins, more wagons, more emigrants. This was the end of the trail. This was Oregon. The wagon pulled to a stop. For the last time, the journey was over. 6 months, 2,000 miles from Independence, Missouri to Oregon City. Done. What did the emigrants feel at this moment? Relief, certainly. Joy, probably. But also, strangely, a sense of anticlimax. The journey had defined their existence for so long. It had been all-consuming. And now it was simply over. What came next? Some people cried. Some laughed. Some just stood there, numb, unable to process that the walking had ended. Some knelt and prayed, thanking God for their survival. Some immediately started thinking practically about what they needed to do next. Find land, file a claim, build shelter. But all of them, in that moment, shared the knowledge that they had accomplished something extraordinary. They had crossed the continent. They had survived the Oregon Trail. Whatever came next, they had done this. They were survivors. They were pioneers. They had made it. Conclusion: the endless trail. And so we come to the end of our journey tonight. The end of this long exploration of the Oregon Trail. But in a way, the trail never truly ends. It exists in history, in the landscape, in the descendants of those who walked it, in the American imagination. The Oregon Trail was many things: a route, a migration, a test of endurance, a gamble on the future. But most of all, it was a routine, a daily rhythm of waking, packing, walking, stopping, camping, sleeping, repeated for months on end. It was the creak of wagon wheels, the plodding of oxen, the taste of dust, the endless sky, the vast prairie, the distant mountains, the camps at evening, the fires, the coffee, the beans and bacon, the walking, always the walking. 2,000 miles, 5 to 6 months, 15 to 20 miles per day, step by step by step, until Oregon, until the journey ended and life, new life, could begin. For those who walked it, the Oregon Trail was a defining experience, the hardest thing most of them ever did, the thing they told their children and grandchildren about. the journey that separated their life into before and after. For us, looking back across more than 170 years, the Oregon Trail is a window into American history, a chapter in the story of westward expansion, a testament to human endurance and determination, and a reminder that great achievements often come not through dramatic moments, but through the patient accumulation of small, repetitive actions. One step after another, one day after another, until the destination is reached. Thank you for walking with me tonight along the Oregon Trail, for experiencing the routine, the repetition, the endless turning of the wagon wheels. I hope the rhythm of the journey has carried you towards sleep, toward rest. This has been Sleepless History. Good night.